Good evening. My name is Cynthia Krause, and I would like to welcome everyone to the regular monthly meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board. I'm currently serving as the chair of this board, and this is our first meeting of 2023. Yay, Happy New Year, everyone. And it's also our first meeting in our new fourth Wednesday schedule. So this isn't an exception, this is our new regular time slot. Next, we have the minutes. So I'll seek approval of the December minutes by unanimous consent as presented. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved as presented. Okay, that brings us to public comment. Tom, do we have anybody here to make public comment?
I don't see anyone new as to make a public comment, and I didn't receive any email from interest in making public comments. I did.
Okay, well, if there's somebody that comes on, I guess at our discretion, we can.
Oh, yeah.
Say that again?
Oh, I was gonna say that the other name is
Staff. I assumed by your comments that Marina is staff. Great, okay, so that brings us to 4 regular business, and before I turn it over to staff to give a presentation, sounds like Matt's here, the consultant is here. I just want to say that I'm anxious to hear, I'm anxious to hear their presentation. You guys should ask questions, and this is just kind of a reminder, but let's set aside our positions until they're finished, and then we can have a deliberation amongst ourselves. And I will definitely be asking everyone to say what they think and why, and we'll figure out at the beginning if we're far apart, if we're similar, if we're all on the same page, and we can all articulate why. It might be a very short discussion. If we're not on the same page, then that will be a really maybe more fun, but a harder discussion, and hopefully we can facilitate a robust discussion and ideally come to a consensus of what we recommend as a board. If not consensus, that's okay too, but I just want to kind of remind us and get us in the habit. Looks like Jerry's on her way in. Yes. Hi, Jerry. I just want to remind us to get us in the habit to ask staff for clarification and more information that you might need, and hold off on the kind of the debate and the merits of different alternatives for us to discuss when they've had a chance to give their presentation. So with that, I will be turning it over. Will I turn it over to you, Matt?
It will be Scott,
okay.
Consultant person. Scott.
Yeah, I think Matt was going to do a quick intro, but he can't talk. He's muted still, Isabel.
Okay.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm Matt Ellis, the Utility Engineering Manager for Issaquah. And I want to, before we begin, just name a few people. Scott Johnson is with HDR. He's the project manager and my consultant for this project. And I am the outgoing project manager for this project, as I'm more on the manager role moving forward. And Marina Bandla will be the acting project manager moving forward once we get through what we're trying to discuss today and with council, and that is the identifying a preferred alternative for this project. And Marina, did you want to pull up your screen, or if not, that's fine. And just to let you guys know, I wanted to be in person, but I am fighting a pretty bad cold. And also, to prevent myself from hacking up a lung during the presentation, Scott was nice enough to present tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to Scott to do the presentation, and I'm here as a support role. Excuse me. And any questions I can help answer. I'm going to pass it off to Scott.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Can everybody see the screen first and foremost? Does that show up for the whole group? All right, so like Matt said, we're here to talk about Northwest Sammamish Road, the non-motorized improvement project. So today, we have a number of goals tonight. The main goal is really to talk with Tab about what is that preferred alternative cross-section for this project. We've gone through a number of different steps in the project development, and we're now at a point where we are looking for input from TAB in making that decision for a preferred alternative. For our agenda today, we're going to go through project purpose. Why are we doing this project? What is the need for this project? Some of the community outreach review. So what have we done to date to reach out to the community and get input on this project and the alternatives that are out there? We'll talk about the alternatives, how we developed them, and then also how we evaluated them to screen them down to the number of alternatives you will see tonight. And then we want to have a discussion. We want to have an active, good discussion with the group, with TAB, to talk about the pros and the cons and the trade-offs that are present with these various alternatives. And the hope at the very end of this presentation here is that we come out of it with a preferred alternative and TAB's recommendation, so that we can then take that to council for the next step of this project, which is council concurrence on a preferred alternative, which will then allow the project team to step forward out of the alternatives development phase into actually project design, preliminary design, as well as permitting for the project. The two main questions we are looking for direction tonight. One is, does the board have a preference between alternative A and alternative C? And I know you don't know what those are yet, but we will get to what the alternative A and C are. The project team, meaning the city staff as well as consultant team, through our evaluation process, we believe that alternative C is the preferred recommendation to move forward, but that's what we're here to discuss as well. One of the big differences you will see in here with alternative A and alternative C is the funding required for the two projects. So alternative C is about $3 million more expensive when it comes to looking at preliminary high-level cost estimating. So the second question is, if funding is not available for alternative C, then does the board agree that in the interest of still providing benefit to the community and for the project, if alternative A would still be the preferred solution to move forward in lieu of having the amount of funding needed for alternative C? So where have we been and where are we now? This project started in early 2020, kind of working through project launch and field work. The beginning of the project really started when the WashDOT project along I-90 was in a substantial complete type of state, meaning we had enough information and enough construction done for the sound wall that's along I-90, as well as some of the improvements for the PQ shoulder project, to go out, get new survey, look at the limits and remaining width that we had out at the project site to see what alternatives we could potentially develop here for the project. From that point, we did environmental field work to establish where sensitive areas are, wetlands, streams, and some of those other factors that play into project impacts. And then we developed preliminary alternatives. Part of that was going out for a community survey, which we will talk about in a moment. Then we went from a community survey to an open house, getting further feedback from the residents of Issaquah, and then went into an alternatives evaluation process. So that's kind of the point we are at today, is to look for that concurrence from TAB based on the information and the processes we've gone through to date. Following this, like I mentioned before, we'll be going to City Council for concurrence and then proceeding into that permitting phase of the project and final design, and then looking for construction funding for the project to move that forward in future years. Back to the project purpose. Why are we doing this project? Why is this something that the city is interested in? So right now, if you look at Northwest Sammamish Road, so this is the roadway just north of I-90, between I-90 and Lake Sammamish. You have the state park that's on the eastern end of the project site. Then you have the South Cove community or South Lake Sammamish communities that are on the western end of the project site. In this area, it's just a 2-lane roadway. We'll go to some photos of the existing conditions out there, but it's a 2-lane roadway. It has wide shoulders that have some bike markings on them, but there's no pedestrian pathways. There's no dedicated area for those pedestrians to access. People go very fast on this roadway. It's just not a very inviting area to be able to make that connection between this amazing facility with the state park, with downtown Issaquah, and then out to this residential community. The roadway is also heavily used when it comes to commuter cyclists and others that use it on the weekends for either commuting to work or for recreational purposes. So it's a very highly traveled roadway. And it's right next to I-90, which I think will play a lot into this discussion about the pros and cons of different alternatives. Looking at the existing conditions that are out there, this is the state park entrance. This is the end of where there is existing sidewalk between downtown Issaquah and the state park. So heading west from this location, there is no sidewalk past the Tibbetts Creek Bridge. You can see the bike lanes on either side of the roadway here as well. As we move further west, this is what we refer to as the pinch point. So if you hear that term, that's talking about this area where the roadway is truly pinched between I-90 and the sensitive area with the wetland to the north. And you can see the state of the roadway here. You can see the bike lanes that you're really trapped between a travel lane and a barrier there next to I-90. This is a little bit further to the west where the sound wall starts. This is recently constructed by WashDOT as part of their project. So this creates a noise barrier between the freeway and this roadway, but it also constrains the limits of available space, which really factors into the cross-section development and alternatives we have to consider here. Off to the right side, hidden behind some of this vegetation are all residential home type properties. And the topography of the land as well, it really drops off on that northern side. So it's pretty steep coming down some of these driveways and into these properties to the north. And then a little further at the western end of the project, we have 193rd, which it's a very similar condition, except the noise wall is now set back about 15 feet where it's WashDOT limited access at that location. But this would be the end point of the project. It really gets us up to a point where you can access all the other communities within that South Cove through the residential streets up to this intersection. So transitioning to some of the review of the outreach we've done to date, we did first start out with a community survey. So this community survey had about 578 responses. Most of those responses were in the South Lake Sammamish neighborhood. You can see over 90% of them. Part of that likely was due to the outreach and the targeting of people that responded to this survey. We put out boards, we did some advertisements for the survey as well, but that was mostly directed to those immediate residents in the community. However, anybody within Issaquah that was on the website could take this survey. But as you can see, 90% of the respondents were that South Lake Sammamish community. Some of the results we had there, most people wanted something, a project. They showed that today they mostly use motor vehicles, but if we build something in the future, they would be more likely to get out of their vehicle, use a bike, go walking, biking, scootering, rollerblading, all different non-motorized modes of travel. And so really they're prohibited from doing that right now because of that existing condition that is out there. These concerns that they had, so the highest rated concern was just a lack of sidewalks. Really that non-motorized use for pedestrians is just not there at all. There is those existing bike lanes, so there's at least something out there right now, but there is no place for pedestrians to go.
Scott,
it was, go ahead.
can you stop for a moment? There's a question, I think.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
It's okay, Micah has a question.
Oh, okay, sorry, I was writing
So
that.
question on the survey. So these are survey responses on the modes of transportation. Is there any data on the actual used modes of transportation? Because I drive that road, I mean, that's how I get here all the time. And I'd be shocked if it was even 10% that was a combined walk, run, bicycle, scooter, et cetera, anything other than motor vehicle. I mean, when it's nice out, sure, you see some people, but so I'm kind of wondering, like, how representative is this survey to the current actual usage?
And Matt, I see your hand up. Do you want to take that one?
Thank you.
Oh, you didn't mean to put your hand up?
No, I did. I just couldn't. I was muted. Not controlling my mute button. So we have not done traffic studies to identify the actual volume, and it does depend on the time of year. During the summer, especially during the weekends, we do see a higher, just visually, we see a higher volume of both pedestrians and a lot of bicyclists. Not only neighbors within the community, but people coming from out of the community biking through this corridor. So it's kind of a combination. But you're right, there isn't a lot of pedestrian or bike users. We are going to be, that's one of the steps we're going to be doing is doing actual counts during the winter or off season, and then during the peak season as well, just to kind of identify precisely the volumes that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Quick comment. Scott, just gonna throw this in there on the review. I see something that's left off, and I gotta tell you, this is a main run for the 271, the Metro 271. This road is, so you've got a bus every 20 minutes on that road coming and going to Issaquah. And it's the only transportation to and from the park, public, if somebody wanted to take a bus to the park. That would be the only thing I would tell you might have left off. So 271 is not an earth-breaking carry. There's not a lot of people who ride that bus, but still, that for the general public, especially seniors, you might want to give that some thought.
And I know we have been looking at the bus. That's not an afterthought. That's not necessarily in here. But that is the intent, that they still be able to maintain the same bus route that's out there today. That's not a factor.
Been there for over 20 years, probably 25 years or more, which is the main part of that particular 271 run. So to me, it's impactful because it's the only road that goes from downtown Issaquah or any part of Issaquah up to Sunset Elementary School. And you get a lot of school buses. I've driven both. So I know that it's well used in the busing community. And it's probably, that's out there. I just wanted to throw that comment in because we can't neglect it. We can't think that that doesn't count. It does. That's all I have to say.
Yes. Appreciate the comment. We can talk more about that as we get further on as well, how buses play into the corridor and how that factors into that preferred alternative as well. So kind of coming back to this community outreach review. So I think I talked about the lack of sidewalks and quality of the existing bike facility. When it came to which non-motorized facilities the respondents to the survey would prefer, the overwhelming response was that the survey respondents wanted a multi-purpose pathway. So what that means is a pathway that can be used for multiple modes of travel. It would be something that's wider than a typical sidewalk so that somebody feels comfortable cycling on it, running on it, being able to pass people coming in the opposite direction. So a wider type of facility. The second most favorited non-motorized facility was some sort of protected bicycle lane. So instead of a typical bike lane like what is out there today, or something that's only separated by a single stripe of paint, something that has either a physical or a separation from the vehicular travel so that you're not next to motor vehicles. So those were the facility. On the opposite end, if you look to the right bottom of the slide, the least preferred facility was just a sidewalk level directional bike lane. That was not something that the community necessarily was fond of. They looked at more in-street bike lanes or wider multi-purpose pathways. So from that survey, the next step we took was to go back, refine alternatives, develop those further based on the responses of that survey from the community. And then we took those to a community open house that occurred on November 9th. We had about 50 people that attended that open house, and it gave an opportunity to have a lot of conversations with residents as they went through and viewed the different boards that we had there. There was also a presentation that Matt and I gave to the attendees at the open house as well. And we did an interactive activity while we were there. So we gave each of the people at the open house a bunch of sticky little dots, and they could go around the different boards that were present, and they could say, is this a facility you would use, or is this a facility you would not use? Or would you feel safe using this facility or not feel safe using this facility? And what that resulted in was we got some data from the community, as you can see on the bottom right of this slide, for kind of what things they would use. One of the unintended things that we didn't expect going into that open house was that by and large, the response was they want something. The community wants something out here. And so they were saying, would I use a multi-purpose pathway? Absolutely. Would I use protected bicycle lanes? Absolutely. But it didn't necessarily rank them. So you can see to the right here that would definitely use, all of those got 17 dots on them. Would not use, those are very similar in the 5s, 3s, 4s, but it wasn't an overwhelming majority that would lead us to a single specific alternative to bring forward. So some of the other feedback we received at this open house and through conversations with community members there was that people are very worried about sightlines. So putting a dedicated non-motorized facility on this roadway, sightlines coming out of driveways for houses, sightlines turning into the different residential units or the side streets that are out there. So because of that, they really would like if it comes to a landscape strip, looking at small shrubs versus tall trees. They did prefer a multi-purpose type situation or a wider facility over a traditional sidewalk, which reinforced the message that we also heard through the survey. And, one of the things we did here is they wanted us to at least consider potentially putting the non-motorized facility on the I-90 side of Northwest Sammamish Road. And so that's something that we hadn't heard before, we hadn't evaluated before. And so we brought that forward as one of the alternatives that you will actually see tonight. That driveway access was a concern that they brought up quite heavily. From that open house, we then went into an alternatives development stage where we looked at the different alternatives that we had and the results and refined those further, narrowed those down. But it also allowed us to eliminate a couple alternatives. We were able to eliminate what was an elevated bicycle lane facility, where that bicycle lane was actually up, separated physically vertically from the roadway. And then we also eliminated a traditional 6-foot sidewalk as an option, since that both through the survey and the open house was not a desired facility from the community, which left us with 4 remaining alternatives. So now we're going to go through those different alternatives, kind of what they are. I'm going to go through these, talk a little bit about them, but we do have a whole section of this presentation. We want to have a discussion about it. So if there's clarifications, questions about the alternatives, I can always come back to them. Yes, go ahead. I see a hand.
So this is sort of a question for all of the alternatives. There's that turn into the state park that you mentioned earlier. And right now you can go around cars that get backed up during the summer when there's soccer games and stuff there. With all of these alternatives, as you go through them, I would like to know whether there's still enough roadway or at that section, whether it will be wider so cars can get still around them. Because I mean, it can literally be, if you can't get around, I mean, you could be sitting there for 5 minutes, which, you know, it sounds like a long time, but it is when you're trying to get somewhere. And it's something that's not a problem right now. And then same thing with like buses. If a bus is stopped right now where the stop is, I think actually it's there's like those concrete things you can't really get around. But how does this, if it is really a 2-lane, the bus can't pull off, does that mean that cars are going to wait for the bus too?
So I'll take that, Scott. So right now we're in the very preliminary stages of the design where we haven't evaluated any of the unique aspects for the project. I do know that at the eastern corridor, eastern end at the state park, our limits are the bridge. There's not much opportunity past the Tibbetts Bridge, so actually at the state park to do many improvements, just because we're very confined by that bridge itself. So the limits are kind of confined right there at that eastern end. So we're not going to be able to do too much for the vehicle traffic in and out of the state park. And in terms of bus pulling off and pulling back into traffic, I mean, it is a 2-lane roadway. There's not much opportunity for passing. I don't think we really want to promote that from a safety standpoint if pedestrians are trying to cross the street. So right now, no, we're not evaluating that. But again, this is a very preliminary design where that's not part of the task for what we'd call like the, 5% design. We're just trying to evaluate what cross sections to carry forward.
But one thing I would add about the bus pullouts, that is something that Metro is actually getting away from, is pulling out buses and then having buses pull back in. They're doing more and more in-lane stops now, just exactly from a safety standpoint.
You won't have any stops from the state park entrance all the way up to 193rd.
Yes,
There won't
correct.
be bus stops.
So, Tom, you had a question?
Yeah, this is Tom McDonald, and I have a question, and that is, why is the bridge the limiting factor if it cannot be widened or extended?
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, my mute button is fully locked, so I mute it so I can cough, and then I can't unmute it. So I apologize for the delay. The bridge, we're not. It's out of scope to widen the bridge. So that would be an additional cost to make the bridge wider to provide more pedestrian facilities. Right now, there is a 6-foot sidewalk plus bike lanes on the bridge, and that's what we're basically going to be tying into. So that's a little unfortunate bit about this project. No matter what cross section that is finally determined, we will have to tie into that cross section at the bridge.
The reason I was asking was being able to carry the road from the intersection with the wide sidewalk all the way up and being able to connect into how this appears in this photograph here by having a consistent multi-use path from it's not 56th Street, the one that goes by Costco and over, where you have the wide sidewalk, 56th Street, and being able to make that curve and have that continuous connection onto this option. That was why I asked the question.
I did want to bring up one point since we've been talking a lot about the bus. Metro and Sound Transit have been doing some major realignment where the 271 would be replaced with the new route on Newport Way. And so about the time that the East Link light rail is connected and activated, that bus will no longer be on Northwest Sammamish Road as planned.
They won't have any service there? No.
Correct. Yeah, it'll be on the other side of the freeway
Still have
with
to
the new
cross
route.
over that bridge, and if you wanted to take the bus to the state park, you'd walk over that bridge on State Route 900.
I believe so. I'd have to look at the maps to see which one you'd take.
That's okay, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
that's a rabbit hole, let's
Yeah.
go,
I
let's.
want to clarify my question from earlier. Right now, right at the entrance of the state park, it's a 3-lane road. I mean, they're like turning lanes, right? But it's 3 lanes wide. Would any of these options maintain the ability to have a 3-lane width at the entrance to the state park?
At the state park, yes, because we're ending right at the bridge before the state park. So it won't impact driving eastbound.
Can you mean at the state park, are you talking west of the state park entrance?
East of the state. Well, there might be a turning lane there. I'll verify real quick.
Yeah, the turning lane looks like it starts on the bridge.
Yeah, so that most likely won't be impacted. as long as it meets safety warrants and things like that. We can take a look at that, but the main point is that the bridge width itself will not be adjusted. We can't adjust that, but I mean, we can evaluate whether we need to accommodate more or less of that turning.
So if you can't change the width of the bridge, which makes sense, and your project includes the bridge, then there seems to be no conceivable way that you can't eliminate that lane and still add in any of these options.
That is probably correct.
Okay.
This left turn pocket right here, this is the one you're talking about, right? So, I mean, this whole area through here, as far as this backing up, I could see like easily you get 3, 4, 5 cars backed up here. Now those cars are backing up over here. Your point is that people coming this way, when it does get a little bit backed up, you have this extra shoulder pavement here. So you're able to sneak around some of those cars to keep going into downtown, right?
Yeah, and it takes 3, 4 cars before it starts to actually back up. Whereas if you're going to use that width to add anything, regardless of the options, you take 0 car or 1 car to back up everyone.
Yeah. And I think right now, as we're looking at these options, how we've laid them out, we are planning to maintain this channelization exactly how it is today for this section right here. This doesn't change currently. But like Matt said, we are still in the very early pre-30% preliminary design alternatives phase. I think this is something to look at and focus on after we have that preferred alternative to see about, does this lane need to get a little bit longer? Will that impact and benefit safety? Some of those things as we move the project forward.
So I mean, do you think we need to move on? But I think Mike is making a really good point, and I'm hoping, I heard you earlier saying, Matt, that you're gonna be transitioning this project to someone else. So you can put a pin in that and just somehow document that, so when the time comes that important point is brought back. But I think we should move on at this point, but it's a great point.
Right, and Marina is on the call here. She's going to be the new PM for the project when Matt drops off. So she's here with us tonight.
Great.
All right, so let's talk through alternative A. So alternative A is looking at really maximizing that multi-purpose pathway. It's providing a very wide facility, up to 14 feet wide, but it also is where we would put all different modes of travel. Because it is a two-way multi-purpose pathway, there is a safety component here. You need to have a planter strip or other physical barrier between the vehicles and the roadway and that pathway, because they're going to be going opposite directions at that location. So we have a multi-purpose pathway of about 14 feet, a planter strip, and then in this alternative, we would not have any on-street bicycle facilities. Some of the things we need to be thinking about here when it comes to this alternative A is the users that are out there and some of the pros and cons of what those users would experience without an on-street facility. They'd be mixed with pedestrians and other users that are on the same pathway going both directions. Alternative B is a little bit of what's out there today plus some. So it maintains an on-street bike lane in both directions, as shown, and then it does have a multi-purpose pathway, but it's a more narrow multi-purpose pathway. So somewhere between 8 feet and 12 feet. Ideally, it's 12 feet wherever we can get it, but there are some spots because of grades into residential units and things like that where we will have to narrow down that pathway just to make everything tie in at the edges. But the benefits of an alternative like this is that you do have the wider pathway still for some of those families or inexperienced cyclists that don't feel comfortable being out in the roadway, but you still provide an on-street facility for commuters and some of those teams that come through here for cycling teams and some of the faster riders that don't want to be on a multi-purpose path, don't want to be next to those pedestrians. Alternative C is almost the same as the previous one, except we're adding a safety component. You're adding a couple feet of buffer for those bicycle facilities. So it's a buffered area between the travel lane and the bicycle lane. And one thing I want to make sure we clarify here is that we show it right now as just paint stripes, but we are looking at not just paint stripes, we're looking at other potential things. We could have inline rumble strips, we could have markers, we could have cones. There's different things that can be put in here to separate for a buffer. But the idea here is that we have a wider section. We have more space to separate those cyclists from the motor vehicle. And alternative D is the one that came out of the open house. Alternative D is looking at the multi-purpose pathway on the I-90 side of Northwest Sammamish Road. So this would really put that multi-purpose pathway in between I-90 and the roadway. Again, you still need the planter strip to provide that separation between the multi-purpose path users and the vehicles who are going opposite directions. But it would put people on that far side. See a hand raised again?
Yeah, so for our point of reference, what's the current road width?
Current road width is 38 feet to 44 feet.
Lane width.
Lane widths are 11 feet today.
11 feet, okay. And so the speed limit is like 30 miles an hour right now for most of it. Would that, with these designs, would that likely stay the same or would that change?
We've done all the designs to meet still a 30 mile per hour. One of the considerations I think we need to think about here is the speed of users that are actually using the facility today. While it's posted at 30, I think some of the data that we've had through the corridor is that many people are much higher above that, with speeds topping out in the 50, 60 mile per hour range when it comes to going down that hill.
Really stuck behind me then.
Can I see another hand raised?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, thanks. Hi everyone. I apologize for my tardiness, but just curious about the barrier between I-90 and the multi-use path. Can you talk a little more about that? And I'm also interested, this might be a washout question, like how frequent are the crashes in that section of it? I'm just concerned about like pedestrian and bike safety there. If something horrible were to happen, that suddenly jets into that multi-use path. I guess like what, has anything ever broken a barrier before or what that looks like?
That's a what we call a Jersey barrier, and it's tied together with cables. So there is some safety to that, but that's one of the factors that we've evaluated when we considered these options, and you'll see in the next few slides that this rated lower just from that standpoint, not only a user ability but a safety standpoint, that putting pedestrians and bikes right between two busy corridors isn't the greatest solution. But the reason why we evaluated it was there's a few residents who live within the corridor, and they were concerned with a change of use from what's currently out there today, going from very few pedestrians to now having to cross a potential pedestrian pathway. And so they wanted to see wanted us to properly evaluate an option where we would put pedestrians on the other side, so as they go in and out of their driveways, they're not having to have that conflict point.
Yeah, and one of the key factors of that barrier is that is a WashDOT barrier. That's not a city-owned barrier, and so there would be discussions. It's on WashDOT right away. It's WashDOT owned, maintained. I mean, I think you can see all the new improvements they did further north. They did not improve this barrier. I don't know if they thought about that or evaluated that with their project, but yeah, so we've just shown that existing barrier staying as is, as that chain link fence on top of it existing as well. And we basically building up to that existing barrier. Those are the four alternatives that we went through and evaluated. We came up with a number of different evaluation criteria, looking really at evaluation criteria through two different factors. So the first on the left side of the screen here is impacts and risk criteria. So these are really looking at what kind of impacts do we have to the built environment, to wetlands, to utilities, what kind of constructability challenges will we have with these various alternatives? And then also what impacts would we have on the traveling public to construct these alternatives? The criteria on the right is really geared towards the experience and benefits of the different cross sections. So how would a cyclist experience this corridor? How would they feel when it comes to their safety and their desire to use this facility? So those are really tied. We looked at those through a lens of the mobility master plan and some of the different criteria that are present there for goals for the city in the long-term vision for non-motorized uses. So we went through that evaluation criteria. When it comes to the impacts and risks, the alternative A does score the highest. A lot of the reasons it does score the highest there is because it's the narrowest section. So when we're looking at these four alternatives, alternative A is 4 to 5 feet smaller than it is for alternative C. But if we're just looking at those high emphasis criteria, looking purely at benefits to cyclists, benefits to non-motorized users, when it comes to that and their safety, that alternative C does score higher than alternative A by a fair amount. That's one of the reasons we're here talking to TAB today and want your feedback and input is that we have two competing alternatives. They provide different benefits. They come at different costs. And we're looking to have a discussion and hopefully come to either consensus or a good feel about which alternative we do think is best to move forward for the city of Issaquah.
Go ahead.
How do you decide, so I'm looking at, I guess, as an appendix with the different points. How do you decide, like, what does 10 points versus 8 points mean?
They're all rated relative to the other alternatives. So they're rated against them from a collaborative aspect. So we sat in a room with city staff, with consultant staff, and we had very long discussions on each of those different evaluation criteria points. Some of those criteria are very easy because they're quantifiable, such as how many square feet of wetland impacts do we have with a certain alternative? How many feet might we have of other impacts? Do we hit utility poles? Do we not hit utility poles? Those ones are pretty easy. When it comes to the criteria such as like a bicycle commuter experience, those ones much longer discussion. So in the memorandum that we attached in the appendix for the meeting memo, it does give a few sentences about that evaluation criteria and the things that factored into what makes a higher scoring alternative versus a lower scoring alternative.
Does that answer your question? Thanks. Carry on.
And so now I think, I don't know if that's us leading this discussion or if TAB wants to lead the discussion, but again, the question we're posing tonight is, does TAB concur with our opinion that alternative C is that alternative that should be moved forward? Or does TAB like alternative A or one of the other alternatives?
And just to kind of elaborate on Scott's point, the cost, we have a very, very preliminary cost with heavy contingencies in there just to kind of give us a ballpark. But we're looking at a cost difference of $3 million between alternative A and alternative C. Alternative A is about 11.5 million, and alternative C is approximately 14.5 million. So,
and a lot of those costs are, it's really width driven. As you get further out, because of the steep slopes on the side, we have taller retaining walls, we have more pavement, we have additional stormwater infrastructure. As you widen out, it gets exponentially more expensive.
So, question, on the printouts that we have, I can't see the total distance from the barrier over to the inside edge of wall. And I was wondering if you could just tell us what the total width is on A and C. And I would think on C, if you have additional width, you also have additional wetland impacts, which means you need to mitigate somewhere else, which also adds to the cost.
Correct, yes. So when we're looking at alternative A, that one has a width between 38.5 feet to 44.5 feet at the maximum. And then alternative C is between 42.5 feet to 46.5 feet. And the reason there's variability there is just there are spots we're going to end up varying that multi-use path. And then we also are accounting for some spots, even in alternative C, where we might have small sections of planter. where we can get it without acquiring right away, without having wetland impacts, things like that.
Thanks.
One of the main considerations, since you asked about wetland impacts, is that all of these alternatives are under half an acre of wetland impacts, which is very important when it comes to project risk in the permitting realm. So it keeps us out of an individual permit, which is a key schedule driver on the project.
I do have a question. I noticed, I just didn't notice it before, but sitting here, item 5, code compliance. I noticed that alternative C scores a 2 and alternative A scores a 4. Is that related to just the complexity, or is there some kind of code hurdle that you don't know how you're gonna get over it quite yet, that you're just?
That's the planner strip is the primary factor for that, because our code does, at least in our central business or central Issaquah standards, require a planner strip. So we're outside of that, so it may not be as big of a factor, but just the fact that we don't have a planner strip there it does score a little bit lower.
I have 2 questions.
Go for it.
So my first question is, I know you haven't done updated traffic counts by users, but I'm curious from the last concurrency run, what the number of traffic trips is for that road? Do you have that number off the top of your head?
We do not. I know we've done traffic counts for vehicles only in the last year, but I don't have that off the top of my head. But our counters aren't able to get pedestrians, so that'll be a thing that we'll need to do in the future.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that. And then I'm also curious, this specific project, and given its location and its shorter spans, what the viability for grant funding is for this.
That's something we already evaluate. I'll let Scott answer that one.
So that's one of the next steps we are working through, is going to be figuring out how to fund this project. And I think that's a joint effort with city management, council, and many discussions. But there are elements of this that will be favorable when it comes to different funding agencies. So looking at things like Transportation Improvement Board or TIB with the non-motorized uses, and then connecting working centers for economic development, that helps. Having something that does have bikes and peds, you can look at WashDOT or Sound Transit bike ped grants that are out there. Right now, there is no stormwater treatment or detention out here. So you're looking at Department of Ecology grants for potentially upgrades to that stormwater system, because we're going to have to do it anyway for just code compliance to get those permits. So there's a number of different things out there. It's just a matter of figuring out how it best competes and get it to a point where it's more competitive, meaning more shovel ready to compete for those grants.
Thank you.
Is that your 2 questions? Oh, okay, right. Okay, anybody else have any questions?
I have one. I'm just curious why alternative B was eliminated. Is that because it didn't have the buffer compared to alternate for the bicyclists? And why didn't that come to the top?
That's a good.
So I don't quite understand the question. You asked why alternative B did not, why we aren't talking about that, why we're just talking about A and C. Is that the question?
Yes.
Could you clarify, do you mean B like boy or D like dog?
B
like boy.
B like boy.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Yes.
Sorry.
Because it's similar and maybe it costs less, but it seems to provide everything that is needed in a way.
The improvement though, just the multi-use.
The biggest factor with B and why we're really leaning towards C versus B is that safety component for having that buffer. That was something when we went out to the open house and the surveys and things like that. Those discussions, people like that safety and that feeling that you are a little bit of away from those motor vehicles. That's really why alternative C scores slightly better than B. They are very similar alternatives. They are very similar in width. The width difference is really just that couple feet for the buffer. But it's really that safety for cyclists and having that additional space for their comfortability on the roadway, which we believe would drive additional users when they feel more comfortable out there.
And that's also standard too for bicycle lanes to have that 2-foot buffer, is that correct? So you're meeting some kind of new street standard?
I know there's a couple cyclists in the tab that maybe could speak a little bit more on that, but they are gaining a lot of traction in Western Washington. There's quite a few projects in other similar cities to Issaquah. That's basically the standard they've been trying to build when they have the space available to build it. So you can see lots of these in Seattle. You see lots of these in Kirkland, Kenmore, Bellevue, a lot of spots where they're building these buffered bicycle lanes now.
Yes, but alternative B has a 10-foot pathway, and alternative C also has a 10-foot pathway. Sounds good. Okay.
And the thing to talk about with the pathway for B and C, which are very similar, is that the narrowest we could do to meet certain standards is 8 feet, and that would be just for like a small section where we have a very constrained corridor or something that we just cannot get around, like a right-of-way feature or environmental impact, where we really need to neck it down to that 8 feet. But the goal would be to widen it out as much as we can to 10 to 12 feet.
Okay.
And when we're talking about those widths versus the cost estimates are evaluating that, I'd call it best case scenario for width, meaning the widest section. So as those areas are necked down, that will influence costs of the project as well.
By reducing the cost, if you have to neck it down, but you're necking it down only for environmental reasons or steep or something.
Yeah, private property impacts, things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of driveways that will be impacting, and I think that's going to be one of the major factors at that point, is making sure that people can get in and out of their driveways without creating a too steep of a slope for them to get back onto the roadway.
You know, it would be nice to see maybe with that Google Maps how many driveways there really are. Because closer to the state park, there aren't as many driveways, correct?
It's purely in that western side of the project, western half of the project up to 193rd. I pull this over again. I mean,
I think there's 10
driveways. So there's some that serve, like this one right here is almost more a side street. It has a whole bunch of houses off of it. Some there's a group of 4 houses down here. There's a couple other ones down here. So it's a number of different homes.
They're kind of like streets as opposed to driveways, individual driveways, it seems like.
Some, yeah, it looks like. Any other questions for these guys? Because I have a question for the rest of you when you've got answers to questions. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you guys to write down, I see there's some sticky pads conveniently. I didn't know they were gonna be here, but I'm gonna go and take advantage of. And I would like you to go back and answer to yourself the question that was put forth. Does the board have a preference between alternative A and alternative C?
C.
Did I say C?
You said B. I said C. I heard C.
C like, does
I have it up here for you.
an apple or C like Charlie?
Charlie.
And secondly, if funding's not available, do you agree with moving towards alternative A as an apple? And I'm going to ask if it's okay if the answer is no, can we say what alternative, like what we would then do about that? Is that on the table? Can we offer that up?
Are you asking me and Matt, or are you?
guess I'm looking at our staff liaison, I'm asking what the ground rules are, because what if the answer is no, are we, let's do this. Let's table that for a moment, but I think if the answer is no, we may need to have a little more conversation, and so just maybe be thinking about that if you happen to have your answer no, but let's go ahead and just write down, and then I am gonna ask you guys to, say what you think, and I think I'll start with Dave, but don't do it yet. I just want you to write down on a sticky, so if you don't have one, grab one. So question one is which of the alternatives between A and C? A like apple, C like Charlie. Why? Maybe just what your top reason for why you say that. And then answer question two as well. So I'm gonna just give everyone like a minute to just write down. So write down your answer and then write down maybe just a word or two about why you think what you think. Because I think what you think is important, and I think why you think what you think is also very important. Is everybody good? Or do you need more time? It's like what, 2 chicken scratches. Is there a lot there? Okay. I once had a professor who made me write down your answer. And he made you write it down because as soon as people start talking, you forget what the conviction that you had when you were just thinking by yourself, and you forget and you become swayed by other people. And that's one of the reasons I like to ask people to write stuff down.
So you're not asking us to debate whether to debate the alternatives within our brain, you're saying, what is the choice?
I'm asking because I think it's the simplest way to start, just because if we have some disagreement, then we'll proceed and have a debate, but I think if we're all in agreement, then that's.
No debate.
Yeah, but that's why I think the why, it doesn't matter what, if we just say yes, that's only somewhat useful as an advisory board. Why we think what we think is also information we should bring forth to those who we are advising. So can I
Sure.
impose upon you and ask you to start?
I get the luxury of going first, but that's okay.
It's random.
Yes, and I will tell you that my answer to Cynthia, for me, after looking at all the alternatives, is C. And I'm not looking at it the same way you guys are. I'm looking at it differently in terms of this thing we talked about the buses. And I kind of thought that Sound Transit and Metro were gonna leave because you start looking at ridership. Ridership hasn't increased on East Lake Sammamish. Ridership has increased with all those buildings and the 425 units. Ridership has increased on Newport. That's not what convinces me. Safety is the biggest thing with C. When I look at C, I see them, the buffer, see that buffer, that wonderful buffer, as a bicyclist, as a bus driver, that buffer keeps those people on the sidewalk safe. And it allows that bicycle lane coming from the west to the east, open. Has anybody in here ever ridden a bicycle down that road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah.
And right now, you're kind of pushed to go on the Lake Sammamish side, which is not the safest way, but there you got an alternative and you got that wonderful buffer. A doesn't excite me because I've seen a lot of trees get planted and they're beautiful and wonderful, but then summer comes along and we have a lot of dry weather, and then those trees become a real maintenance factor. That's a small little item. The safety was what convinces me C is the best bet. And remember, even if the Metro and Sound Transit leave, the school buses are not leaving. They're gonna be on that road because they've got South Cove all the way up to Sunset Elementary. So that's a huge spot for me. Especially pulling off. Here, you got that buffer, so even if there was an emergency and they had to pull to that curb by the sidewalk, both lanes can get around. It wouldn't be safe, but it would be safer than the other three alternatives. So that was the reason I made the decision pretty quickly. And Christie can tell you, I wrote down safety. Was the biggest thing that I saw. Alternative D, I'm not even interested. You're trapping those pedestrians and bicyclists right in the middle of two busy thoroughfares. And I think Isabel said, somebody said, the speed limit is not adhered to on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, on East Lake Sammamish.
We know what you meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not adhered to.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it comes at 40 to 50 miles an hour, most cars. Until the police department puts up those things for speed and people slow down. I like C. I think it's the safest and bang for the buck. I would even say if there was any way to figure out a way to get the funding for C, we would be much better off as a city than we would be trying to jerry-rig A to make it work. And I know, I said jerry-rig, that's a term. No.
Just Jerry.
Yeah. So
That's right.
it is a term,
Yes, I know.
especially
I've
in the
heard it.
military, because you fix up vehicles, they call them jerry-rigging them. Anyway,
I don't know what this.
for me, it was easy.
Great.
C was
Okay.
the safest.
Christie, will you go next? We'll go this way.
Sure, I'll go next. I waffled quite a bit back between A and C because of the constraints outside of the span. So the driveways, what happens before and after that spans. But ultimately, I think C is the best approach. But I worry about the width and bicycle safety, having them on street when it comes to the neighborhood sections. So, but I think from a safety perspective, this is the best option. Thanks.
What about you, Micah?
Well, I think first about the money side of it. So I think we need to remember that any money spent on this is money that's not spent on something else. So even if we could find the money to be able to pay 14.5 million for option C, that's 3 million compared to option A, that could go towards something else in the city. So, and we're not looking at everything all at once, but just, I think it's, when we just say, well, if we could get the money for it and try and put more money this way, we need to also realize that that is taking money from something else or just ever increasing our spending, which there seems to be an addiction to in this state. I also noticed there's some interesting things in this table. For example, connection of State Park to South Cove neighborhood is higher on C than A, which just seems interesting. And then the high emphasis criteria, only one of the criteria is for vehicles. And yet, even the survey, which I find hard to believe is accurate, there's the majority of traffic the majority of use is vehicles. So it seems like those should at least be weighted for use. Right now, there's 2, so would that be out of the total of 5? So 20 out of the total 50 points
is cyclists, and yet right now, I would, just based on my experience, guess it's more like 10% at most of the users of that road are cyclists. So we're not weighting things based on the actual users, which I think is problematic because it's going to lead to wrong decisions. Yeah, I am waffling a little bit. I think my first inclination is A, because it seemed like the feedback was that a multi-use path is what's preferred most. It's lower cost. I think it still, achieves that connection. But I do have concerns about how narrow the curb to curb width of the road is. As Dave was pointing out, if, a bus needs to pull off the side because it's broken down, you're not gonna be able to get around it very easily, and you're gonna create a backup. So I actually don't really like any of the options. I don't like spending an extra $3 million to create buffer bike lanes that are not gonna be used that often, and are paid for by the people that are using the road for the majority. But I think, there is a lot of value in the other options, including C, where there is that sort of wider curb to curb width. Also, just to comment on the speed limit, yes, people do drive too fast on that road, but I remember years ago reading a study about how the safest speed is like the 80 percentile speed of what people actually drive on the road. I'm probably misquoting it, but there is a sort of an element of if people think that's the speed that should go there, over 30, well, then maybe 30 is actually too slow. And I'm continuing to not be super fond of the whole, we need to make travel for vehicles slower, less comfortable, narrow the lanes, but for other users of the road, we want to make it more comfortable for them. So, I think honestly, I'm kind of half and half between A and C, but from a pure cost perspective, I don't think it's worth an extra $3 million. So I would say A between those two.
Got all that from those little scratches?
Yes.
Okay, I have a pretty strong opinion that C is the most practical for the most number of users. And I feel, I think it's obviously incredibly important. The name of I know that the neighborhood has been asking for this for a long time, and we need to be very, very aware that the neighborhood, the local folks have, it impacts them. But also, I think it impacts, it's a major corridor. And so I think having it for commuters. And so I think that that's really, really important to be able to accommodate them. And so the strong reason that I prefer C, I generally am not supportive of mixing the modes on paths. I know it works sometimes, it works fairly well in Sammamish most of the time. I'm not a huge fan of it. And I'm particularly not a fan of the idea of having it be one way for some segment, and then as soon as you get out of this study area, this project area, you had to then cross the street. So that's a major concern. And so as is, I know like there may be a 20-year vision where that could get extended, but as it stands, because it has to interface with the road on the other side of it, you would be asking a cyclist to cross the road twice in about a minute and a half. And if you were riding through there to get to your job in Bellevue, if you lived in Issaquah or the Sammamish Plateau. And that is so impractical that I don't think that the project would get funded. And so it wouldn't be cheaper, it would be more expensive, because we wouldn't, I don't know all the different programs that we can apply for, but it seems that that is so impractical that it would be hard to get the project funded.
Question, what do you mean by a minute and a half?
If you're riding through at 18 miles an hour and you travel through this study area and you have before and after it, you are in the shoulder, which is essentially the current bike lane, the current situation. And now you have no place to go. So you have to go use this multi-use path because that's where you're being asked to ride. So you're not gonna do it. You're just gonna suddenly have no place to ride. You're suddenly gonna have to merge with traffic. Or you're gonna have to cross the road and get onto this multi-use path for 4,000 feet and then cross the road back again. Let's say if you're an eastbound cyclist coming through this project
You're a
area.
fast cyclist at 17 miles an hour as far as, like,
That's how fast you.
Say that again?
you're a fast cyclist at 17 miles an hour for most cyclists.
Oh, he still says 40 miles an hour, so it's 2 minutes. So you have to cross the road twice in 2 minutes. That's just not really practical. So I have a lot of concerns about that. And so that's why my answer to the second question is no. My answer to the first question is I feel strongly about alternative C because I think it, despite the extra cost, it serves a lot more users. And I think that the cost to the city of Issaquah would actually be higher. This is purely speculation, obviously. Nobody knows the answer to this question, but it seems likely to me that something as practical as C would be much more attractive to funders than alternative A, because I think it's impractical for the regional bicycle users.
Just one really quick thing. I do find that very persuasive about not having to cross the road. So if that is, and I'm not sure if I'm imagining that it correctly, but if it is in fact true that you would have to cross more often based on where you're connecting from and to, then I would agree in that case that C is the best option.
You may not want to cross because you're going 18, 19, 22, and so you're just going to be forced to join the traffic because no one's going to do it.
And that's not safe.
And let's
either.
talk about like the cycling theme that I'm part of, like going especially eastbound. And this is not a situation, you know,
That's my concern is
we're going
eastbound travel.
24 miles per hour in a straight line, right? We're not gonna get on.
You're going to merge with traffic at
Yeah,
that point, right? Which is then.
And he'll
less-
slow down traffic.
Right.
So that wouldn't be safe either.
So I think that's why I kind of teed this up with the question two, if my answer was no. And then we can get into that if we want to, but that's,
Yeah, I prefer C, just because when we're looking at a regional perspective, the way I get out of Issaquah and get back into Issaquah, get out of Issaquah to Newport Way, right? Because that's the most convenient. I also really appreciate how the buffer was made there, really a hard barrier, over there on the Newport side. So doing something like that for this would be ideal. And I come back usually from Bellevue, you know, on the north side of I-90, so on Sammamish. And so when we're talking about that, it's a regional thing, a regional issue. Those are the two major ways to get in and out of Issaquah from the Seattle Bellevue area. And so I think we should be talking about that just by virtue of that. And so, you know, having a clear bike way of getting through is super important. And so I'm really just looking at a regional bike corridor on Northwest Sammamish. And when we're talking about expenditure, the 3 million additional expenditure, it's a capital expense. It's not part of the general fund or anything like that. So we're not really talking about taking money away from a different purpose, just so flexibly. Because it is a capital expenditure, there is grant funding available, and talking about grant funding, this is probably more accessible to those things because you have a buffered bike lane, you have the mixed use pathway, and then you have the storm water issue as well. And so you have a whole bunch of other, especially for the buffered bike lane, I think that opens up some additional feasibilities. And just the safety of putting walkers further away from traffic, further away from cars, and putting a hard buffer in some places along that corridor is crucial. What else do I have there? And, we're talking about a really long-term vision, of course. And so we are talking about the short-term impacts about the driveway access issue, but really talking about long-term vision for Northwest Sammamish and it being such a regional corridor. I feel like we just have to weigh that much more, just as a bird group. So that's my thoughts on that.
Great. Sure, what about you?
Well, I definitely saw alternative C as the safest for all modes of transportation. And that's the reason why I would choose alternative, that's why I chose alternative C as the best option. And I saw alternative A, it's not working and it wouldn't be safe for cyclists. And the whole point of this new concept was to make this corridor more user-friendly for non-motorized transportation. And so, and alternative C is really the only solution that makes it safest for all types of users. Now, I did have a question again about alternative A or maybe another alternative. So I would not go with alternative A if alternative C didn't work. But I was wondering when I was looking at alternative A, you could probably do a hybrid of alternative A and C if the multi-use path was only 8 feet wide. It wouldn't be ideal for the public, but at least they would have an 8 feet wide multi-use path and you would eliminate the planter strip, which, you would, and maybe that would work here because we're close to a freeway anyway, and then just have the buffer. Then you could add the buffer for the 2 bike lanes, have the 5-foot bike lane on each side and the 2-foot buffer on each side. But then you would eliminate the planter strip and just go with an 8 feet multi-use walkway. It's not very green, but that's another alternative that wasn't looked at, so.
I think they said that the 8 to 12 feet, it's really just depending on how much width they have available. So, they can't actually make it less wide.
They can make it 8 feet wide.
Well, it is already, that's already there are certain places where it's narrow enough that 8 feet is all they can fit. So it's 8 to 12 feet. It's only when it's wider that they would go to 12 feet.
Okay, but what's the planter strip width? Is it 5 feet or 3 feet?
It varies. So the planter strip width is 5 feet's ideal. That you can grow a lot more. Your plant survivability is a lot more. Your maintenance is easier. But 3 feet is viable for a planter strip or a patterned concrete strip or other type of strip that provides separation.
So are you assuming the 3 foot minimum
But
or?
I think what I heard there is you're looking at alternative A, talking about potentially narrowing the multi-use path, reallocating some of that space to the roadway, which I think is kind of what we do with B and C.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So we're trading multi-purpose path width. Multi-purpose path gets narrower in B and C because we are taking a lot of that width and allocating it to those bike lanes in the street.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay. All right.
I had a similar thought. I thought B, if we couldn't do A, it'd cut costs, that B was a better alternative for the eastbound biking primarily and separating the ways. Was that all you had to say about that, Sherry?
Yes.
Carry on? Okay, Tom, that leaves you.
Okay.
Oh, of course, thank you. And Erica too, I'll get to you. You'll have to keep reminding me, sorry. Go ahead, Tom, and then Erica.
I'm all about A. And the reason for A is because if you look at Newport, there's kind of a side path that has both bicycles and pedestrians. If you look at High Point Way, same thing. I like the idea of coming around from Lake Sammamish Trail, coming around with 56, being able to hit the same type of trail going up. And at some point down the road, it would not just end where this study ends, it could continue on up to East Lake Sammamish or West Lake Sammamish Road. So you have that continuity. And I find it safest to have everybody separated on the side. Do away with trees, primarily because after 4 years of public works, maintenance and roots, have bushes, stuff like that, but no large trees going on. But I like that it's completely separated and you have the cars on one side and you have the path on the other side, not a racing corridor. Bicycles probably still right down the street, like I would if I'm on my racing bike. But you're next to a park for the most part. And so why not have all the amenities and stuff next to a park while you're looking at the park as opposed to not. Alternative C is, the thing with alternative C is makes it actually more of a transportation corridor where you have bikes and cars on the road getting one place to another. But I think for the purpose of what this is, looking at connecting the Lake Sammamish Entry Park area and eventually to this point south or east of there, up to South Cove, that the parkway and the pedestrians and bikes all separated is the better route to go. So I prefer alternative A for that. I may be the only one or two, but.
I follow your logic.
Erica.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
I prefer C. I'm concerned about just the comfortability of like various levels of bikers. So if there's a two path option of like that multi-use path and dedicated bike lanes for like folks that are experienced commuters that can, match this, maybe not match the speed of traffic, especially if folks are speeding on that, but you know what I mean? Versus, just folks that are like out with their family, going to the park versus like they're getting to work, they're on the road, they're on a mission. So that was a driving factor for my choice in that. And for the second question, if no funding is available, would A be okay? And I know I'm supposed to give a yes or no answer, but for me, it just depends kind of on like, well, what is the wait time on the funding? If we're talking like 20 years, then like, I guess, but I guess to me, it's just, well, like how, I don't know, what's the timeline? Like that's more, I would just need more info on that, I think, to make a better decision.
So I'll answer that one right now, just to kind of give you guys a heads up. So what we're trying to do is we're in the CIP season this year, is to identify our next round of projects that we're going to bring before council for construction, right? And design and construction. And this will be one of the higher priorities from the transportation side. So even though it's not funded, the reason is we don't have a cost associated with it, or at least we didn't when we started this process. So now we're getting closer to that refinement. And when we get to the CIP development, which will be in March of this year, we'll at least have identified a cross section that we are recommending to council, and that will then show them the cost, and then that will help us plan for all the other projects that we're trying to accomplish. So we will have a funding mechanism associated later this year. It won't be constructed this year, obviously, but at least we'll have a pathway forward and an idea of when it will actually be constructed.
Okay, thank you. No, that's really helpful. And then, so I think I would probably switch my answer over to a bit more of a no. And I'm liking the arguments, and I agree with about option C. It almost makes us more eligible for different like potential grant opportunities. That makes me think that I guess I'm more hopeful that like we would be able to find funding for it.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to make a suggestion, and then you guys can tell me if you agree with that or not. I would I'm glad that this is a great, it wasn't, I felt we had a robust report out of our thinking as opposed to like, we had a little back and forth, but I don't know if anybody wants to add anything now, having heard everybody else. Maybe before I make a suggestion, I'll just ask, does anybody have anything to add or want to modify anything they said based on what other people said?
I mean, not particularly for that section, but I was thinking throughout the conversations that we were having, whether we want to have like another thematic discussion of like, is this more of a, do people think this is like a regional transportation project overall, or is it something just that we should tailor more towards the connection of the neighborhood to a major state park?
Well, what I was going to say is this was kind of leads to my suggestion. My suggestion was going to say, now I forget, were you A or C, or did you change your mind?
I was A, and I'm actually more convinced of A now.
Okay, okay, because you got some support.
Well, you made an entirely new argument, and I was like, I get that, I agree with
Okay.
that, so.
So we could, sorry, I'm looking at my watch, but a text came through. It's 7:30. And one thing that might be useful is an advisory board, what did we think? Why do we think that? We could say that generally so of the 8, by the way, we have perfect attendance tonight, thank us, good for us. 6 out of the 8 said A, MC, like Charlie. 2 said this, and here's why. And I know we don't have long things in our memos to our, to council when you guys write these, but to capture that debate, I think would be useful. And to say the why. And I personally kind of think it boils down to the point you both made, and it sounds like you're on board, which is for the South Cove neighborhood, seems like a nice facility, but that some of us felt like this was such an important regional transport, like the folks that were on with C were thinking about this as a more regional project. And I don't disagree with the idea that if I think of it as a South Cove project for getting them to the park, sure, that seems like a lovely facility, but because it is smack in the middle of between Issaquah and Bellevue, I don't feel like we can ignore that. And so what I was just wondering is, as far as how we want to put a bow on this, are you guys comfortable with staff writing up that description of how we felt about it and why, and how we didn't, some people felt this way, a majority felt this way, but there was an important minority discussion for these reasons. Go ahead.
So I have a question. If thinking about it from a regional facility, I'm just thinking about the times that I've driven through that area. It's so heavily residential focused. If you're cutting back through that way, is there even the right of way or the ability to make it a regional facility long-term? And I think that's a question I'd be curious from staff or the consultants, if that was a point of consideration as you were looking at this project. Because we kind of touched on that on an earlier tab, but then we didn't delve into the details.
Well, we just talked about right away, but are you saying, can we get the right of way for these alternatives?
If we were to do a regional facility and continue that design, say to Bellevue or on to Redmond, is that even a piece up?
Oh, you mean have a separated path all the way?
Yeah, or is it at some point in time, it's just gonna skinny back down to, a very narrow road where you can mix cars and bikes and maybe have, I don't know.
I don't know if that's a question for staff. Like, are you saying, like, do we want to, is what you're saying, do we want to look at this as an interim stage that will be consistent with a long-term vision to have a separated path?
I was following your line of questioning,
Yeah, okay, so that I think, and I know you have your hand up, is it related to this? Because, okay, go ahead, because I want to maybe dig into that a little bit.
Is this gonna build a on-road bike path to nowhere? May go to Issaquah, but we don't have control, we're heading into a different city.
yeah.
And then we're also only looking at a certain stretch of this road, right? If we're not gonna make the connection, then all we're really doing is we're saying, well, now we're gonna provide this enhanced bike path for people that live in South Cove. And in that case, you go, well, what's their priority if we're just building something that would most benefit them? And it seems like as someone that lives in that general area, it's gonna be, I wanna be able to take my kids and my dog and walk, or my kids on their little bike, and they're not gonna bike on the street. I'm gonna tell you, I'm not gonna bike on the street there. I'm not a daily cyclist by any means. I would feel incredibly unsafe being on the street. I would though take a bike down to the park from where I live. And if you don't know that you can build that the rest of the way, then you lose a lot of the advantage. Which I agree, if it's a transportation corridor, I think there's a lot of reason to say that's the right direction, but transportation corridor implies it's a corridor, it keeps going.
Well, I would say that this particular Northwest Sammamish, right, it already has a bike lane of some sort. I would call it more like gutter, but this particular stretch right next to I-90 is the worst part of Northwest Sammamish.
Yeah.
No question, especially when you're going eastbound. It's the worst part. And so when we're talking about, and there's already, it's not really a connection to nowhere. There's the I-90 trail, and the long-term idea is, I would think, improvements on both sides of I-90 for both Newport Way and Northwest Sammamish, to access, South Issaquah and then North Issaquah and Sammamish Plateau. And so there's already that I-90 trail. There's the improved Newport Way on Bellevue side. And so, you have the roundabouts as well, and then you have Westlake Sammamish as well, coming from Redmond. And so you already have all these connections, and we're just talking about improving the worst part. And I think the long-term vision, I hope it's being considered, to make it improved across the entire Northwest Sammamish corridor. But that's my thinking.
But I think what I'm hearing is that folks might feel a little differently about alternative A if they thought that would carry on all the way to the exit 13, the intersection with Lake Lawn and on into Bellevue.
Yeah, I was thinking that at some point that we could carry it up to Westlake Sammamish Road.
And I guess now I want to turn back and just say to staff is that my understanding was that was not even on the long range plan.
That's correct, and that's yes. So this is like you guys have discussed. This is the narrow spot, and the community asked that same question, like, why are we spending so much on this spot and not looking elsewhere? And this is our most constrained spot, also the most uncomfortable spot for both pedestrians and bicyclists along the corridor. There is not great opportunity, but some opportunity further west for people to walk and bike with more comfort than at this location. But there is not planning in the future for this to extend. There's other priorities within the city that we're currently pursuing for the near and roughly long-term future.
Understood. And then, but 6-year plan is always rotating it until this can come up in another 10 years to recognize that. I know right now there's not any.
Yeah, and I will add, the city of Bellevue does have plans for Westlake Sammamish Parkway. They have the I-90 trail, and it looks like they've got a new trail plan that would be parallel to the I-90 trail. So on the Bellevue side, there's lots of plans.
Is that a multi-use trail, or are they trying to put?
The Westlake Sammamish one's a multi-purpose trail. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know about the Newport one though.
And not a dedicated bike facility.
Right.
Right, that's where you go behind the French immersion school and then just take the ramp and go up.
Oh, that one, you're talking about that one, okay.
Quick question. On that Bellevue side, I don't know that there's even a plan to bring that I-90 bike trail down on the west side of the highway. I thought it was gonna switch at Eastgate and come over to the east side and redevelop the trail that drops down there now. I've never seen a design on the west side, not the west side, sorry.
The south side of.
South side, not the west side, the south side. I've never seen even sketches of anything. I thought that I-90 trail was gonna come to Eastgate and switch over and come over to, the east side instead of the north side of the, it's confusing, isn't it? Because you're heading west, right? So south is there and north is there, correct? And I thought it would come to the north side and then the improvement would be made to the I-90 trail. In fact, I think they did some improvements while they were building that wall. I thought they did. I haven't been down, I can't tell you. But that's out of the scope of Issaquah, correct? That's regional, correct? So I'd kind of like to see what the regional plan is in the development of this, because it would seem to me that this would just play into at least the bike part of non-motorized, the right plan for development.
I do appreciate this regional approach, and yeah, I just think this is, would be the best option just because of that. And long range might change, but
So is that something so that we want to recommend as a group that, we landed primarily, we have 2 for option A, balance for option C, but in thinking about the design, we want to make sure that we're looking long-term ahead and opportunities for connectivity from a regional perspective. Understanding we don't have control over other municipalities, but certainly long-term, we could come back and look at what are those opportunities that exist. The short-term, right, is how do we get this neighborhood supported and the significant safety improvements that are needed?
So I think what I'm hearing, and I'm not sure I'm right about this, but what I might be hearing is that, I guess one thing I would say is I believe it already is a regional facility. And so, but the other thing is, it sounds like this idea of whether we consider it in the larger and both space and time perspective, I still feel like what I'm hearing is we might actually have different conclusions. I feel like some people are saying, well, if it's gonna carry on all the way to the west into Bellevue, then we should go with this wider trail, because then it's a regional wide trail, and looks at alternative A. And I think other people are saying, oh no, it's a regional facility, and so of course we want to separate the bikes and make it easy to bike through there and separate that from the peds. And so I think the regional thing is really hanging us up. And so I think to keep in the scope of what we're being asked to recommend, I think we should look at the time horizon that we're being asked to and kind of maybe bring us back to where we started. I feel like it's an interesting discussion, but it might be taking us somewhere that it might not be that useful to the staff or council, because that's not the matter before them. And so when you were gonna say something, Dave.
No, I just had a great thought. It would be fun since it looks like almost all the TAB members ride bicycles, that we do something this summer to tackle that trail all the way from like Mercer Island, all the way back to Issaquah. You could do it easily in an afternoon or an evening, but.
I did one of those in graduate school, but you have to invite the public. But they would come too. We can notify them.
I can surely tell you that we wouldn't have to take cars. We could take buses, because there's buses that.
We can have
the whole thing, but that are not listening to the A guys, not the C people, but the A guys, okay? It spiked my interest in what's regional. You know, what are we gonna do regional? If this is, because this just becomes part of that. And these guys have worked their tails off getting us that information. But still, it's gonna play into the regional arena. Seems like the region's gonna maybe even come up with the funding to help us make that a smart decision. Enough for me.
So I guess what I want to ask Matt, I suppose, so I did have a question. Will this go to the M&I committee before it goes to council?
Yes, it will.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna ask you, Matt, if you feel like what you're hearing is cohesive enough for you to then do what you need to do and reflect us. And then are you guys feeling like, are you feeling like we're pretty clear? I mean, I don't think that we could actually make a motion because I don't think we could, we could say, we could, but we know how it's gonna end up. I mean, we could, but it doesn't include the why. And I think the why, and I think having those voices of why the minority felt the way that they did, I think is important, is whether we, so let me ask Matt and then we'll come back to you two. Go ahead, Matt.
So I think what I'm getting, I got out what I wanted from this presentation, because what I really wanted was your guys' input on preferred alternative. And from a transparency standpoint, what we'll do is we will provide not the consensus, but individual reports of why 6 of you chose alternative C as a regional facility for bike support users for different mobilities, whereas 2 of you chose A, better for community as a community facility, better for use for the neighborhood people in South Cove, and more friendly to ride next to the parkway instead of next to the freeway. So we'll provide that information to council so that way they can then make the determination. We were just trying to get from you guys your perspective and not to make the final say on this, but to get the board's on the matter, being experts in transportation.
And the other thing I think we heard too, Matt, is on question number 2, it wasn't so much we want to build something to build something. We'd rather wait for the funding to build the right thing for this area than we would just to build something that costs less. I think I heard that fairly clearly from most folks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think as a volunteer advisory board, I don't think the margin of return to get to consensus, it's nice to get to consensus, but I think in order to get there, it would take an awful long time. And I think that you've gotten what you need. I did want to say that, Matt, you may not be as tuned into this, but what we've been trying to do is send somebody from the board to the M&I committee meetings so that if they have questions. And then also we had come up with a new process by which when you write out the tabs part of your memo to them, you could run it by us and we promise to return it right away. Not the whole board, but just the chair and the vice chair, and we will give you comments right away. But we think it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a quick look at what you have gleaned from, how you're describing what you're hearing. It's just nice to have that check-in point. And that's something that we started doing last fall. So I would ask that you just give us that quick opportunity and we promise to return real quick the response.
Absolutely. I think I appreciate that. And just to kind of clarify on this whole thing, because we had the discussion between the 2 alternatives, and I'm glad that it wasn't a consensus. It just showed that both are valid options, and both are. It's not like we're not presenting unsafe or unfounded options with either one. Both are going to be would be great facilities in this corridor. And I think that's the main thing to take away from this, that nothing would be a thing that the community would be upset about. We're providing a better facility than there is right now. And I think that's the main thing from you guys' perspective, is that you're taking the interest of the community at heart, and that we will present this as well.
So I'm gonna just say that some of us feel, I would not necessarily agree. I think the community of people who ride their bikes through here will have something taken away with alternative A. And I know that not all of my peers agree with me, but I think some of them do. And so I do think that I recognize that we don't all agree, and that's okay. And I don't think we have the time or the, job description to resolve that conflict, but I just want it noted that there are a couple of us, I don't think I'm the only one that feels like A would take away something that we have now to get through there. It kind of sucks, it can be much improved, but if we move to alternative A, it would actually be worse for not the South Cove community, but for the community of people that ride their bikes through that neighborhood.
And it would possibly dissuade, I mean, maybe not, but like, it would move people away from maybe cycling that stretch.
And we haven't even
Just
talked
the
about that.
inconvenience.
I'm sorry, I didn't have that. Julian, what was that movement?
It might dissuade people from riding.
They still have a fairly wide, I mean, they still have
Not with
the.
A.
wider-
With A, you
Oh,
have
A,
to
yes,
ride
yes.
right in the traffic or cross the street twice. Those are your two choices. And right now you have a better opportunity to ride through there.
And there's design options to treat either ends too. It's not like you're gonna end and like people are gonna be hosed once it's at the end. There'll be options to treat bikes getting from one side to the other too. So I didn't think that was an issue.
I think it's a huge issue to ask a cyclist to cross the street twice in 2 minutes. So, it's okay that we don't all agree, but I just wanted that noted. So you were saying that they're both great options, and I think that some people agree with you, but not everybody agrees with you.
And this is not even just an inconvenience issue, I would say it's a safety issue because of the design speed of that road. I mean, people are going, 40 plus miles per hour possibly, later into the evening when it's less busy. And so, crossing the road twice and those high speeds, the combination of those two things come up into a disaster, but.
So when I worked annual bike counting, it's always on that far corner.
I was wondering about the Cascade bike counts that they do in May. Yeah, I think we should get tied into, I'm hoping you guys.
In the corner.
So when you,
Which
so on the corner
corner,
of 56 and West and.
Right.
Whatever that road is. The road that
It's
we're
like
talking about,
yeah.
it's right on the corner on the far
It's one
side
of
across
the
from my house. That's where.
It used to be, and I wasn't sure if it still was, yeah.
Since
So
COVID,
when you
I
say
don't know if
cross
they've been doing
twice, I wasn't sure I understand.
If you're eastbound,
Going eastbound, yeah.
if you're driving
Right on the right
eastbound
side.
and all of a sudden
You're gonna cross the road.
you
get
need
on
to cross the road
yeah.
to use this facility in alternative A,
That's one crossing. Where's the second crossing?
to come back,
Oh, okay.
because it's only 4,000 feet long.
So far, yeah.
Right. In the near,
Yeah,
foreseeable future.
that goes back to that question about future planning and projects, because if there was future stuff that would continue it, that changes that conversation probably.
Right.
Once Bellevue sees how awesome it is, they're like, we want that same thing.
But we're not in Bellevue when this ends either. We're still in Issaquah.
Yes, exactly.
We're still in
Yeah.
Issaquah.
We're a long way from
But it's a better bike facility
right.
further west.
Yes. So
This is
sorry,
the
I didn't mean
worst.
to get us derailed. I just was getting uncomfortable with your summary. I was with you 90% of the way, but then when I just wanted to capture that, and especially because I don't think I'm the only one that thinks this. But I think that, again, it's an advisory body. We're not making a decision. You've heard what we have to say, and I think you've done a great job listening, so I appreciate that. And I thought this was really useful and pretty substantive, and I think that's the kind of stuff that we are interested in volunteering our time for.
It's great hearing the different opinions.
Yeah.
And I think you can't deny that we can't just exclude regional thought processes. They have to be in there of what the region is looking at. Because I know it doesn't stop in Bellevue. That trail comes out east. And so regionally, we gotta know they're either gonna go on the Newport side, or they're gonna go on the northwest, Sammamish side. There's only two places to go. So what is that thought? Do we know? Does the city know?
So if you're looking for additional information on some of that stuff, I would recommend looking at the Mountains to Sound Greenway website. So they have regional trail plans on there that basically goes to that interchange through Bellevue.
That's scary for me because Dave Kepler will be after me. Yeah, if I do that.
Okay,
Never mind.
he's good.
Okay, I feel like we're backsliding. It's 7:53.
Erica
Did
has-
you,
Erica
oh,
has her
thank
hand
you.
raised.
Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that, Erica.
No worries. And I think it's just worth mentioning, I know we've talked about the regional, like looking at the regional aspect of this as well. And even though we are the Issaquah Transportation Advisory Board, one of the components of the MMP is planning for growth or preparing for growth or whatever that point is. And to me, I just think that ties it back into that, like, you know, core function of the MMP.
Thanks for that. Did you ever get any, you had your hand up at one point?
I'm good.
Okay. I want to make sure that, does anybody have any burning questions? Because I'd love to move through the last part of our agenda. I feel like we had a good discussion and I appreciate everybody coming well prepared and putting a lot of thought into it. This is great. And I appreciate staff and consultant. A lot of great work here and a lot to talk about. And you served up stuff that we could sink our teeth into, which we really appreciate. And it was all very clear. And so that's really great. I really appreciate it. I think does that conclude that agenda item? I'm always looking at our staff liaison. Okay, great. So that brings us to item 5. And there's a 3-month look ahead for the board work plan. Isabel.
Yes, so I'll try to be quick and wrap everything, both items up. For the next couple of meetings we have, during February, the ITS plan, we will be discussing projects that will be included, that we are proposing to include as part of the ITS plan. And for the transit capital projects, we will be doing that in the way of a memo for that meeting. So take a look at the memo for that. No, it won't be a presentation, so we can focus the concentration on the ITS projects.
Okay.
But we will be including the transit plan capital projects in the memo. I did send an email not too long ago about a board summit special meeting that will be scheduled. So far, we do have that February 16th date, but we are still sorting out the details for that meeting. We will keep you posted as soon as we finalize those details. But it seems like that is the meeting date that we're looking at. And thank you everyone for your attendance. It seems like most of you were available to meet that meeting, so thank you for that. And the meeting will be to discuss the CIP criteria with other boards as well. For March, we will go back after having that summit about the CIP criteria, then we will go back with having a discussion specific with the tab about the CIP criteria, and the month after, we will bring the projects for the CIP after having that discussion with the tab on the criteria.
Is that April or that's March?
April, yes.
Okay, April.
Yes. Other than that, you have seen a memo from Thomas in the materials. Those included the kind of the review of how the meeting well with the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. Our Vice Chair, Julian, was able to attend that meeting. Thank you. And for that, the committee was very they were supportive of the decision that the options that were provided with the recommendations from the TAP and especially the Parkway where we were able to incorporate the recommendations that the TAP that resulted from the December TAP meeting on the Parkway typology. And other than that, you have seen these two names on the screen, two new names, Marina and Nick. These are new staff that we are adding to our team. They are our senior transportation engineers that we hire between December and January, and we'll plan on adding some more staff as an additional engineer next month.
Nice. Congratulations.
Welcome, yeah.
And I think that's all I had. Yeah, that's all.
Great, that brings us to the chair report, which is, I'll make very brief and just say, thank you for including that summary. It's really nice to see these things come full circle, so I think that's really helpful, and hopefully it's not a whole lot of work to bring that back to us, but I think that makes this work a little bit more satisfying to have that bow tied around it. And sounds like mid-February is when the applications will be open for new boards, so we're looking for two, there'll be 2 regular positions that'll be open and all 3 alternate positions. So I feel like we're like doing a really good job because there's 9 open positions and 8 people are here tonight, which is awesome. So we're doing well, but we definitely need to backfill to make sure that we have a robust board. And so people that have something to say, see if you can get them to come apply for the position. That's all I have to share. Thank you guys for a great meeting, and are there other business or announcements? Okay, should we introduce the Public Works Director, Emily?
I can say hi. Hello, everyone. I haven't had a chance to come and shake a few more hands, but I'm Emily Moon. I am the Director of Public Works. I have been in that role for about 3 months now. I have previous experience with the city of Issaquah, so I know a smidge about a lot of things, and I'm trying to build my knowledge in the world of public works now. And I'm really excited about all the work that this board in particular will be working on this year. And I think as we've just mentioned, we're growing our team. And so I think it's going to be a very good partnership between the board and our staff as we move forward. So thank you.
Welcome home.
Yeah, welcome home.
All right, for some reason, we don't have to make a motion to adjourn, we just adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second.
Yeah, we're adjourned. Yeah, why is that we don't need to, does anybody, you're a good.
Robert's rules.
Yeah.